When you entered a monastic kitchen in the year 1200, in either Europe or in Persia, in the kitchen of a palace, you would have found servants peeling wrinkled, brain-shaped nuts out of a tree so valuable, so necessary to human society, that wars had been fought over the groves in which it was growing. This is a split personality tree that cannot be categorized by the modern world. It is kingly wood to the carpenter. Its wood is so valuable that a single walnut burl is sold at a price of $50,000. And this is cut off trees that are more than 200 years old, to make the dashboards of Rolls-Royces and the gunstocks of good rifles. Yet to the dietitian and the doctor it is the tree of life. Ancient Persians referred to it as the royal nut. The Greeks gave it the name of Jupiter, the king of gods. And the science of the times has affirmed what the science of the ancient past had known. This nut has compounds, which literally do a rewire of your brain chemistry. Here is the account of the English walnut, Juglans regia, and its American relative, the black walnut, which is a controversial tree. It was the nut that has kept Roman armies on the move, financed the Renaissance, suffered a 50-year federal prohibition in America, and since then silently became the forgotten scenery element as we import 99% of our walnuts off corporate orchards in California. Welcome to ancestral yields. When you are willing to plant trees that will nurture your future great-grandchildren and not continue to purchase what you could be cultivating, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Open up the nut conspiracy. In order to comprehend the cultural significance of this tree, we must begin in ancient Persia, the present-day Iran, where the walnut was initially tamed more than 8,000 years ago. Persians were not eating walnuts, but rather worshipping them. The walnut tree is referred to in the Zoroastrian literature as a sacred plant of heaven. Kings of Persia had large walnut trees, not only to use the nuts, but also to represent their riches and strength. The trees were so precious that when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 330 BC, he wrote in the censuses of the spoils about the great walnut orchards. He took the walnut seeds to Greece and the Romans took it to the empire. The Romans used the name Juglans, meaning Jupiter acorn, in reference to the walnut. They thought that the nut was food that was worthy of gods. Walnuts were recommended by Roman doctors such as Pliny the Elder to treat headaches, digestive problems, and even as a remedy to poisoning. The reasoning was not wholly mystical. Walnuts do have compounds which aid the functions of the brain and detoxification, but the Romans lacked the chemical to prove it. What they were sure of was empirical. Those who consumed walnuts on a regular basis lived longer and had their wits. Thus, the walnut ended up as an ingredient of the Roman military diet, placed with the dried figs and grain in the rations of the military personnel. When the Roman Empire fell, the cultivation of the walnut did not disappear, but instead it shifted. The knowledge on the walnut became the main repository of the monasteries in Europe. Walnut groves were cultivated by Benedictine monks who also carefully detailed their methods of doing so. The furniture and sacral inscriptions were made of wood. The nuts were crushed into lamp and cooking oil. The green hulls were cooked into a brown dark color that was used to stain cloth and leather, and even the nut meat was ground into medicine pastes. By the 16th century, all great monasteries were equipped with walnut groves. The tree was believed to have been a gift of God, one planting, which yielded food, medicine, timber, and dye to the generations. However, there was the expansion of colonialism. As the European settlers landed in the Americas, they found a tree that resembled the one that they were familiar with in their home country. But this was not that tree. Juglans nigra, which is the black walnut, was indigenous to the east of the United States and had been cultivated by the indigenous people in thousands of years. Black walnuts were extensively used by the Iroquois and the Cherokee, among others. They ate the nuts, boiled the hulls to form a concentrated dye to use in the basket and clothes, and used the inner bark medically. The wood was valued with its strength and beauty. Black walnut was the new timber of gunstocks, wagon wheels, and finely finished furniture, as it did not warp and was not rot. European settlers could see the worth at first sight. By 1700s, black walnut was being exported back to Europe, where it was thought to be better than European walnut when making furniture. In Monticello, Thomas Jefferson had planted black walnuts. Mount Vernon had walnut groves, the property of George Washington. The tree was omnipresent, and the tree was glorified. Then in the early 20th century, something made of a strangeness crept in. The black walnut became opposed by the federal government. In 1926, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was launched to eliminate the black walnut trees on agricultural land. This was attributed to the fact that the black walnuts secrete a chemical named juglone that is poisonous to some plants. Juglone exudes out of the roots, leaves, and hulls of the tree and retards the growth of tomatoes, peppers, azaleas, rhododendrons, and other crops. The USDA claimed that the black walnuts were not compatible with modern agriculture. However, what the USDA did not say was that black walnut timber was exceedingly precious. One black walnut tree that has grown up would fetch up to 20,000 or more of its wood. The government and timber companies convinced farmers that the black walnuts were a nuisance, thus receiving a constant flow of cheap walnut lumber. Farmers cut down trees which had grown 150 years, sold the timber at pennies and planted corn. In 2 generations, black walnut groves that had been consumed by indigenous community over millennia disappeared. This disease successfully eradicated the black walnuts in American farms such that by 1960, they were almost non-existent. They were continued in wild hedges and the lost areas in ancient estates, but were not regarded as crop. Meanwhile, industrial production of English walnuts or Juglans regia, the lower caliber, easier to crack Persian, began in California. By 1980s, the Central Valley of California produced 99% of the commercial walnuts sold in United States. The sector was amalgamated, mechanized and dominated by a few corporations. You can go out to California today and get walnuts. You don't grow them yourself. You don't even think about it. And that's the point. The walnut was turned into a commodity you buy in a plastic bag. A tree that every farm had, whose workings were familiar to every family, on which every community relied. And in making that transition we had lost something deep. Let me show you what we lost. First, the nutrition. Walnuts are more or less 65% fat, however, not the saturated fatty acid present in meat and dairy. Walnuts contain some of the highest levels of alpha-linolenic acid or ALA, a form of omega-3 fatty acid, of any plant. The content of 2.5 grams of ALA corresponds to 1 ounce of walnuts, which is approximately 14 halves. It contains more omega-3 than a portion of salmon. Omega-3s are essential in the health of the brain, suppression of inflammation, and prevention of cardiovascular disease. Research published in Journal of Nutrition has revealed that consistent consumption of walnuts has a positive effect on cognitive ability, especially in older adults. Walnuts weigh 15% also. That is more than the almonds, which contain approximately 12% protein. 100 grams of walnuts provide about 15 grams of protein, and large quantities of magnesium, phosphorus, copper and manganese. Protein, healthy fats and micronutrients comprise a combination that makes walnuts one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth. But it is the polyphenols that are magic. Walnuts are also rich in L-agitannins that are converted to urolithins through the gut bacteria. Urolithins have been indicated to enhance the functioning of the mitochondria, literally making your cells generate energy more effectively. In a study published in 2016, in Nature Medicine, urolithin supplementation prolonged the life of lab animals and enhanced their muscle activity. What is the only food source of L-agitannins that form urolithins in significant quantities? Walnuts and pomegranates. That's it. Even higher concentrations of these compounds are found in black walnuts in particular than in English walnuts. They are less exploitable, more tannin-laden, and more powerful and well-grounded, but more nutritious. The issue is, black walnuts are not available in majority of the grocery shops. They are too labor-intensive in order to be processed to sell industrially. Thus, the healthiest type of walnuts, the native ones, the ones growing wild in half the nation, become practically unavailable until you mill it with your own hands. The walnut tree does a good thing to the land now. Black walnut is allelopathic. Yes, it produces juglone, but juglone is no poison, a strategy. Due to the black walnuts to thrive and evolve, some plants do not have to struggle in the same environment as their competitors do not pose a threat to them. Nevertheless, this does not make them non-compatible with any agriculture. It just requires knowledge. The black walnuts had to be worked with by the native people, and the early American farmers knew how. You do not grow tomatoes under a walnut tree. Jugs. You plant those that are tolerant to juglone. Squash, beans, corn, melons, raspberries, blackberries, and even most of the grains. Within a permaculture system, the walnut is the overstory, which offers extensive root mass, nitrogen recycling by leaf drop, and an enormous harvest of nuts. Understory plants are the species which can stand juglone. The system is very beautiful, but it demands monocultural thinking. The Black Walnut campaign by the USDA was not protection of farmers. It was of reducing agriculture to a paradigm whereby it needed inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, yearly seeds. A black walnut tree does not need fertilizers, no pesticides and no replanting. It carries a 300-year crop. It's a perennial food system, and permanent food systems do not bring profit to chemical companies. And how are you going to get the walnut home? All you need to know is the two major species. English walnut, Juglans regia, is less difficult to crack, is milder and more widely grown. It can withstand the USDA zone 5 to 9, but it likes a Mediterranean climate. The English walnuts possess thinner shells and larger and sweeter kernels. They are the walnuts that are stocked in shops. Juglans nigra, black walnut, is a native of the eastern United States, and can be grown in zone 4 to 9. It has a more solid and thicker shell and a deep, intense, almost smoky flavor. The black walnuts are more cold tolerant and disease resistant than the English walnuts, but they are more difficult to process. To reach them, you require a hammer, a vise or a special nutcracker. The two species have a slow establishment and are extremely long-lived. An example is a walnut tree planted today, which will only yield nuts in 7 to 10 years, when it is planted in a grafted cultivar, or 10 to 15 years, when it is planted in a seedling. But when once begun it has no end. A fully grown walnut tree yields 50 to 80 pounds of nuts annually each year, centuries on centuries. A walnut needs space to be planted. These trees attain height of 50 to 75 feet and width of canopy of 40 to 60 feet. These are not the backyard trees. They are the estate trees, the farm trees, the legacy trees. Plant them 40 to 50 feet apart unless you do not have the space. Walnuts sleep well in well-drained soil whose pH is between 6.0 and 7.5. Their soils of preference are rich loam, though they can endure a variety of soils. It is possible to grow walnuts on the seed. However, a very important step is necessary: stratification. The seeds of walnut possess a hard shell and need a cold and wet stage in order to germinate. Gather fresh walnuts in the fall. Strip the hulls, put on gloves, as they are messy to handle, and plant the nuts 2 or 3 inches into the ground in advance of winter. The freeze-thaw freezing will break the shell inside, and catheter nuts will grow during spring. Alternatively, they may be stratified artificially by placing them in moist sand in a refrigerator between 90 and 120 days before planting in spring. You need a grafted tree to make more money. The cultivars of English walnut have been grafted, such as Chandler, Hartley or Carpathian, and will yield in 4 to 7 years. Black walnut cultivars to be grafted are less common, though good ones include Thomas, Emma K. and Sparrow. They are available in specialty nurseries such as Stark Bro, Burnt Ridge Nursery and Grimo Nut Nursery. Walnut trees do not need much attention after planting. They need to be watered during their initial years of establishment, the first 2 years, and then they are drought resistant. They don't need fertilizer. Actually, the addition of nitrogen may decrease the nut production since the tree uses it in foliage rather than fruits. Prune minimally. Walnuts exude sap freely when pruned in spring, hence pruning must be made late in summer. Pick the walnuts in the fall when hulls crack and nuts fall to the ground. Gather them as soon as possible. They should not be kept on wet soil where they will mold. Take off the hulls as soon as possible. This is messy work. The hulls have tannins and juglone, and they will stain your hands with black. Wear rubber gloves. Other individuals employ a corn sheller or a huller machine. Others just stomp on them. After hulling, lay the nuts in a single layer in a place that is well ventilated and allow them to dry in 2 to 4 weeks. This dry phase enhances the taste and removes the difficult shell of the kernels. Cracking walnuts is an art. English walnuts are readily broken using a normal nutcracker. Black walnuts require force. A bench vise, a hammer, or a special black walnut cracker may be used. The effort is worth it. Walnuts that have been freshly cracked do not have a store flavor. They are delectable, fat and intricate. Keep unshelled walnuts in a cool and dry place. They keep for a year or more. Walnuts that have been shelled are supposed to be refrigerated or frozen to avoid the rancidity of the oils. Now, a word of warning. Juglone, which is a horse poison, is found in walnut hulls and shells. When I have horses, I must not turn them into walnut trees or the hulls that have fallen on the ground. Juglone also leads to laminitis, which is a severe hoofed disease. In humans, juglone is not toxic provided the nuts are well processed. But when touching fresh hulls, it is better to use gloves. This is what the planting of a walnut tree symbolizes. It is the rejection of commodity food system. It is a rejection of the yearly cycle of buying. It is a recognition of the fact that food security is not what you can purchase but rather what you can produce. A walnut tree planted today will nourish your children and your grandchildren and men and women whom you will never see. It is a biology inheritance, a living trust fund, a 300-year investment into a future you will never see. The walnut did not die out because they ceased to be useful. It was eliminated due to the fact that useful trees do not result in annual revenues. There is a walnut tree that was planted in 1920, which is going to produce today, and they are nourishing people, and they do not use any inputs. This is a bane to a consumption-based economy. So the walnut was rebranded a nuisance, a relic, an oddity in the landscaping, and we forgot. But in Iran, they didn't forget. Orchards of walnut are family priceless as they are transmitted through generations. Walnut oil is still squeezed in local groves in France and sold at $40 per bottle. Green walnuts are preserved and served as a delicacy in the Balkans. The knowledge was preserved in the rest of the world, only we lost it. So plant a walnut. Sow it in the spot that is to live with you not. Let it nourish centuries. Make its wood hard. Sink its roots deep. It is a tree, which requires patience and gives it eternity. It is kingly food, food of the gods, and a thing you leave behind you. And in case you like this well-known excursion into the oppressed trees of history, please like this. Their cropping, which they do not wish you to grow, has more tales to tell you at the ancestral yields. We'll see you in the garden.